From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, welcome into the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende. Riding co-pilot, as he's been doing now for the last couple days and weeks, is Andre Johnson Jr. Before we get into today's topics, be sure to like, share, rate, review. If you are watching us on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast YouTube channel and get the bell notification when we drop the new videos. Last week we had a lot because there was a lot of news.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to drop some more this week. First and foremost, happy Monday to all. Happy Monday to you, my friend. Did you have a good weekend in the city of New Orleans?
Absolutely. I ate plenty of king cake. I got plenty of rest, man. It was great. Watched a little bit of the Pro Bowl, watched a lot of basketball. It was fun.
Big week ahead in the city. Big week ahead in the city. If you are the Mardi Gras fan, this is the week for you.
This is their Super Bowl.
This is the Super Bowl. And look, it coincides Sunday, and Super Bowl Sunday is Bacchus Sunday. So it should be a fun week ahead. A lot of things happened over the last 3 or 4 days. A lot of things happened Friday. We got into one of the topics. Another topic kind of slipped under the radar, even though it shouldn't have, but because it was such a big topic with Clint Kubiak being the guy that the Saints are working to hire, we really couldn't go in this other direction. So that's what we're going to do topic 2 here today, a couple days later after we had a chance to digest it with our big picture today. So what is our big picture item today?
Our big picture is Saints quarterback Derek Carr. He was recently speaking on a podcast about how his relationship with Michael Thomas kind of went south. And a few of the noteworthy things he said, Sean, he mentioned, Michael Thomas talked about injury balls. Derek said he doesn't know which throw he's talking about. He mentioned that he believes that some of Michael Thomas's frustration not just came from his injuries, but also came from Chris Olave taking all of the first-team reps, which is obviously a change for Michael Thomas. And he specifically said, quote, almost sounds like a breakup, quote, I hope Mike finds what he's looking for. I hope Mike gets everything he wants in life. I love Mike, but he went on to say that Mike should have just called him instead of going on that Twitter rant for everybody to see. He even went on to call it a little middle schoolish, Sean. So when you heard those comments from Derek Carr, were you surprised how candid he was?
No, I wasn't surprised he was candid, but he had to respond. He absolutely had to respond. And if you watch the podcast, it's Amber Theo-Harris, used to work for NFL Network, and James Jones, his former teammate, the wide receiver. I'm guessing they do a podcast now, and Derek Carr was a guest of theirs. He was pretty, I guess you'd call it diplomatic would be the word, and how he delivered those words. But so he was trying to somewhat keep the peace, but also slip some jabs in as well. Yeah. Obviously, the big thing being, look, this is middle schoolish, social media. And look, it was an interaction Michael Thomas had really with just kind of back and forth with just a random Twitter user, and he just unloaded on his quarterback, or I guess now former quarterback. So look, first off, I got a lot of notes here about that because there was a lot of stuff that happened. So we're going to get right to it. First off, look, he had to respond, absolutely had to respond. There is no way a player that carries that much weight, both in football and in social media that like Michael Thomas does, can go that hard after a player and not respond. And Derek Carr did that. This is the platform he chose to do it on with this podcast. It was the first time I'd ever seen that podcast, but nonetheless, it was a really good interview. He had to respond. He couldn't not respond, especially as the highest profile player on the New Orleans Saints, and Michael Thomas being at one point the highest profile player on the New Orleans Saints. So Carr, like I said, he was mostly diplomatic, but also made sure to stand his ground in a few ways by talking about, it could have been a bad ball, maybe not was a bad ball. I've thrown bad balls before. The frustration with Chris Olave was interesting to me because that was really the first time that I had heard that. And obviously Derek Carr would have firsthand knowledge of that if they're trying to phase in Chris Olave as the number one receiver. I thought that was certainly interesting. And then the obvious, look, just call me, man. Just call me. This is middle school, and that's really what it was all about. I mean, you can't do that on social media with the big enough platform that Michael Thomas had, and then almost like the passive-aggressive way to do it, because he didn't just come out and tweet it. He tweeted it in the midst of a conversation. It was just weird. Bottom line is this. Doesn't matter where you fall on the Mike Thomas, Derek Carr debate. And I know both sides both have their supporters and their haters. The bottom line is simply this. This relationship is over. This relationship is broken. It cannot be fixed, at least not in a team/organization/football setting. We all know this. Someone in this relationship has got to go. And it ain't hard to figure out who. In the Carr versus Thomas sort of debate, the Saints are choosing Derek Carr. A good, decent quarterback, still got some football in front of him, over a wide receiver who has missed nearly 50 games in the last 4 seasons, who's on the wrong side of 30, who has a habit of when he drifts away from football, has a habit of going on social media and just lighting the thing on fire. Look, some of y'all I know are in Michael Thomas's corner here. I get it and understand. Some of y'all hate Derek Carr, but don't be blinded by your bias towards Derek Carr or your love of the nostalgia associated with Michael Thomas, that this is the blatantly obvious move thing they had to do. They're going to move away from Michael Thomas. They're going to go all in with Derek Carr because they made that investment. And look where they're at in both of their respective careers. So that's where I stand on it. If you're Derek Carr, you had to respond. This ain't getting any better. This relationship is going... It's south. It's done. Yeah. And it's a total 180 from when Derek Carr signed here to where it's at right now. I guess that happens. And the Saints have made their choice. I know some fans aren't going to be happy about that. But the bottom line is they're going in that direction. And frankly, Michael Thomas is going to be left behind, or he'll find somewhere else to go to prolong his NFL football career.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the 180 since Derek Carr got here, and that's just what I wonder the most. And maybe somebody will speak on it and we'll find out more down the line. But I just wonder where this went wrong, because we remember in Derek Carr's intro press conference, he said Michael Thomas was the guy who was ahead of everybody else in recruiting him to New Orleans. And when you listen to Derek Carr's comments, you're kind of like, where was the disconnect? Because it's not like Derek Carr is like, oh, he's the worst quarterback Michael Thomas has ever played with, because Michael Thomas, post Drew Brees, not trying to say who anybody's better than anybody, but Jameis Winston, Andy Dalton, a little bit of Taysom, a little bit of Ian Book.
Teddy
Bridgewater. Like, Derek Carr isn't worse or like, it's not like he's worse than all of those guys. So you could argue this is the best quarterback he's played with since Drew Brees, but the comment, and you mentioned it as well, that stood out the most to me was the one about Chris Olave. Because you wonder what changed. That's what changed. Obviously, the injuries also, took his stats are down, obviously. First 4 years, 1,100, 1,200, 1,400, 1,700 yards. Last 3 seasons, 400, 100, 500 yards. So the numbers obviously dropped, but I think just the treatment of being a number one receiver, the respect, the adulation that comes with being the guy on your team. Once Chris Olave comes in, he's getting all those first team reps. I think that's probably the biggest thing that changed.
That's what happens with these hyper-competitive guys, even though Thomas and Olave are obviously Ohio State guys, and Thomas likely took Olave under his wing, and they're different types of players or different types of receivers. But the bottom line is Michael Thomas, if you love him or hate him, is not a number one receiver anymore. You could talk yourself into the idea of Chris Olave becoming a number one receiver in this league if he's not there already, especially with the way he ended this season. So clearly that's happening behind the scenes. And look, man, I have now gone back and watched the play at least 30 times, I've tried. I do a lot of film studies, so I've tried to view it from a film study standpoint, from a way the play could potentially go. It's where the play Thomas exits the game on. It's a little backside, little smoke route that he runs, one step and cuts in like a slant route. And for the life of me, other than it maybe being a little bit like, he led him a little bit, maybe a half step too much. Other than maybe putting it right on his chest, it looks like a totally normal routine play. The play before, the first play of the game, or their first offensive play of the game, Thomas runs an out route. Carr misreads the coverage. He thinks it's man. It's actually zone. So there's a flat defender there. So ball's a little high, and he gets hit in the back. I thought that was a bigger mistake by Carr, and that was the play that could have gotten Mike T. Andrew, but he didn't get hit in the leg on that play. It was more like in the ribs. I thought maybe he was exposed to possibly broken ribs. In fact, I thought that when it happened. So the actual play where he exited, I'm telling you, I've watched it so many times. And look, in that locker room, when they watch film, I'm sure there's something there where maybe it should have been placed a little bit differently. But you can't watch that play and be like, wow, that's a horrible throw. I mean, it was well within the realm of what a normal throw would look like in that type of play.
Absolutely. So for Michael Thomas moving forward, it just seems like Derek Carr said, I hope he gets everything he wants in life. I hope he finds what he's looking for. For Michael Thomas, it's interesting to see where he sees himself next, because as much of a competitor as NFL players are, if you put Michael Thomas on a lie detector test and asked him, do you still think you can be a number one receiver in this league? I think that answer is going to be yes. So the question is now, where can he go to where he is going to be that number one guy? Because I don't know if there's many places.
Yeah, look, everyone's going to point to Denver. That's fine. I mean, they seem to be doing the whole, Saints of yesterday kind of thing over there. Anywhere he goes, it's going to be a very inexpensive contract wherever he goes. Even if he had no sort of personality clashes with other teammates. This ain't the first one with Derek Carr. Let's be honest. There's a lot of other players as well that have clashed with him. Even if he didn't have that, he's still over 30 and hadn't played a lot in 4 years. You're not getting a lot of money. You got to get on the field and play. So you're not getting a lot of money. It's probably going to be a low risk, potentially, a team would view it as a possibly high reward type situation wherever they would go. But they're not investing a lot in you monetarily. And the Saints are probably going to have to do the post-June 1st cut, which means he gets cut before, but they got to carry him on their books and his cap number through June 1st. You don't get the space until June 1st. It's a common cap maneuver that they do because they just have to do it with the dead money charges. But, it was interesting. I don't know if you saw Derek Carr. It wasn't his last Instagram post, but it came up right around this. It just said something. As a matter of fact, let me just pull it up. I'll read it. It said, it's a picture of him, and it reads, I got it right here. If they aren't for you, they're against you. Demario Davis said it was personal at the end, so we made it that way. So we stayed together, and our team finished on a mission. Now time to come back better than ever. This came up just a few days after the Michael Thomas rant, and I noticed, I went through the comments and the likes. There's a lot of teammates in his corner, like Juwan Johnson, Pete Werner had liked it. There was a couple other offensive players that liked it. A few other posts. Olave had liked it and commented on it. Lynn Bowden, remember Lynn Bowden? Another guy was another one that commented on it. So Carl Granderson was another one. So he's got his support in the building. And the bottom line is, even if you had totally object, even if any reasonable person would look at the situation and say, yeah, we have to. He's the quarterback. We have to move on with him.
Right.
And the wide receivers hasn't played. He hasn't been dominant since 2019. It's time to cut our losses and just move forward. And that's where this thing really belongs. And hopefully Carr's response to it officially puts it to bed.
Yeah, like I said, it sounds like a breakup. Those don't sound like things you say if you want a guy back. If you want a guy back, you're saying, I hope we can work things out, get him back in the building because he's a really talented guy. We're past that point. So for the Saints, you've got a good, talented young guy in Olave. You've got a new OC coming in. You've got Shaheed. You've got tools for Derek Carr that he can work with. And for Michael Thomas, you've got teams say, I don't know if you're going to win very much over there, but there's teams where he can go and maybe be the number one guy. The New York Giants, the Carolina Panthers, the New England Patriots. None of those three teams really have a dominant wide receiver, but none of those teams are also in any playoff walks right now. So we'll see what
it's an interesting point you bring up because that's right. I mean, Carr wasn't like, look, we'll work it out. We're teammates. We're brothers. That was more of, I wish you the best, dude. Good luck. Get out of my life, basically. Though we're done. We're done with you. And honestly, it has to be that way. Like for Mike's sake, for Derek's sake, for the Saints' sake. Let's just move on, just close that chapter. And honestly, if you've been covering this team over the last few years, I have said at least 2 or 3 times in the last 4-year window where Mike T was clearly banged up and not himself. And this is not the first time we've had social media issues with him. I say we. The Saints have had social media issues with him. I hate when I do that. But the way I thought his last day, he had played his last day in black gold, and somehow he ended up back. I think you're at the point of no return finally when it comes to Mike Thomas.
Absolutely. Like you said, that chapter is closed. We are moving on post Mike Thomas, and the Saints are also moving on post Doug Marrone. We mentioned earlier, in bringing in the new OC, we talked about moving on from Pete Carmichael, and they've moved on from a lot of coaches in this process. Doug Marrone, the offensive line coach, now being the latest.
Yeah, frankly, I was surprised that he wasn't a part of the original round of firings when they parted ways with Pete Carmichael and Cody Burns, and I forget, is it Bicknell, the assistant. I thought that was an obvious one with Doug Marrone. I thought the drastic decline up front was obvious and obviously was a major issue. I thought the Trevor Penning factor was a major issue. The fact that he was a starter to where he couldn't even get on the field in the jumbo situation, that was certainly a major issue. And this feels like, to me, they're working to hire Clint Kubiak. If since the hire you're seeing an offensive line coach be removed, to me, this is you can put two and two together. Kubiak, their new guy, choosing his guy up front at offensive line coach. I know Luke Johnson said one of the top targets is going to be John Benton, a Kubiak disciple, been around the Kubiaks and the Shanahans for a long, long time, and clearly they were willing to let Kubiak pick his new guy. It's very important for any offense, but I'm telling you, with this system they're going to run, and I just kind of wanted to refresh myself before we came on and potted. I went back and watched the second half of the NFC Championship again, their offensive snaps.
Right.
I mean, they are in such lockstep, that offensive line, and the style they want, what they want to do, what you have to do with the motions and the shifts and the checks. It is a huge, huge hire. So I'm very curious to see who they turn to eventually. John Benton is a name, obviously, that has popped up, but the Saints have a lot invested there. They're going to keep investing there, but where does the pivot happen? We talked about this last week because Jeff Ireland hinted at that. Is it a new style of lineman? Are there some guys currently playing that we're not even seeing that could be on their way out because of the new scheme, the new fit, the new sort of things that they value up front? We mentioned Trevor Penning. Part of me says, they got to get the most out of that guy, but part of me also says, well, is he even going to fit what they want? Because they like the smaller lineman, and Penning is huge. So that's something to certainly monitor going forward. Also will quarterback coach Ronald Curry and tight end coach Clancy Barone stay on? Because as of right now, those are the last two main assistants offensively available or still on the staff from last season as of right now. And sounds to me like Kubiak's going to have his choice.
Right.
And honestly, if you're giving a guy the keys like that, I'm sure it was a big part of the sell to come here. They're going to let him pick who those guys are. Maybe they keep those two. Maybe they go somewhere else. But I'm telling you, the offense they're coming from, they're heavily involved in this hybrid tight end, fullback, H-back. There's they got the Kittle, the Juszczyk, you got the Deebo Samuel, the wide receiver, running back kind of coming. It's a lot of versatility, and go back and watch it. It's beautiful offensive football when you really watch the 49ers clicking, because it is something to really watch how they're able to marry everything horizontally and vertically and the footwork. It's something to watch.
Absolutely, and like we mentioned, it's not a good fit for what you're bringing in and what you've got in, or what you had in here as Doug Marrone. When you look at Doug Marrone, obviously the Saints had a lot of issues protecting Derek Carr early in this past season. They finished off pretty well on the offensive line, but to me, the biggest indictment on Marrone as the offensive coach is the lack of success in the running game. 2022, they were 21st in yards per carry. This past season, 31st in the league in yards per carry. 4 runs the entire season of over 20 yards.
Yep.
None of those coming from Alvin Kamara. 0 rushes of over 40 yards. One of 9 teams in the league this year to not have a single rush of 40 yards. And you saw it in that running game. The big plays just were not there throughout the season. And then when you look at the fact that Marrone's biggest project, his biggest tool, was the guy that they drafted in the first round last year. You draft an offensive lineman in the first round with the offensive line coach that you're just bringing in. A lot of times we talk about coaches' success being locked into their quarterback. I think Marrone's success was largely locked in to the production of Trevor Penning, and that production just simply has not been there. So you look at the lack of production from Penning, you look at the lack of production in the ground game, you look at the fact that they struggled to protect the quarterback. Now bringing in a new coach for Kubiak, there's no reason to keep that guy around when he wasn't really able to produce in the last regime. But You mentioned John Benton. Worked for Gary Kubiak, Clint Kubiak's father, for 6 seasons. Spent 6 seasons with Kyle Shanahan. So in that offense that Kubiak's likely going to bring over. And he even worked with Mike LaFleur, who is another Kyle Shanahan disciple.
LaFleur was a name that I had looked at and said, maybe he might be an OC candidate they would give a look to at some point. But yeah, so it's all in that family, though, like you said.
Right.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, that was basically that was basically it. Like Clint Kubiak, when you talk about fits, when you talk about a guy who knows what system that you want to run, a guy who's familiar with it, he spent over a decade working with the Kubiaks and in the Shanahan system. So I think that's a huge, if he's able to bring in John Benton, I think that's a huge hire for your offensive coordinator, which is essentially going to be the big first move that he's going to make.
And I will go back to this, a point I made a little earlier. Like, don't be surprised if there's a starter or an every down player or a common offensive lineman that we're used to seeing that all of a sudden with a fresh set of eyes looking at it is like, this guy don't fit what I do. I mean, this guy don't fit what I do. I mean, that's what you're doing when you're bringing in a new coordinator and a new O-line coach. And maybe it's because I just watched it like 30 minutes ago. Like the synchronization of that offensive line with their backs and the motions and the shifts and the things you have to be. It's almost like choreography almost when you really watch it. So I am so thoroughly curious to see how this is going to look with this offense and this offensive line and this quarterback going forward and all obviously the skill players that they have. So not surprised. Again, what would have been interesting is if, let's say they had to go were they willing to keep Marrone if another coordinator was fine with him? That would have been interesting to see because to me, what he showed last year, to me, it just kind of felt outdated. It felt like he had kind of fallen back into kind of that almost like that living in the past type thing that they've had a issue with over the last couple seasons. But fortunately, they won't have to make that choice.
It feels like they were simply because, like you mentioned earlier, he wasn't in the first round of firings.
Right.
The news that they were letting him go didn't drop until all of a sudden they were pretty much locked into bringing Clint Kubiak in. So it seems like if Clint wasn't their guy, if they had maybe gone with a Luke Getsy or some of the other names that were out there and they were okay with keeping Marrone on, maybe they would have done that, which is kind of surprising to me just because of the lack of production. You know, Trevor Penning not working out. Nick Saldivari, another offensive lineman who barely got to touch turf last season.
It's another one, right?
You know, and just the lack of running, the struggles to protect Derek Carr. There just hasn't been a lot there for you to say, this is our guy on the offensive line, and no matter who we bring in, we want this guy to continue to lead the trenches. So,
you know, he's another one of those. He's a little bit of like a Carmichael guy because, like, he's not a failure. He's not a failure of a coach. I mean, and you can make a case of the coaching tree. He probably had the most success of anyone that left here and had the success as a head coach with Buffalo, Syracuse, Jacksonville. I think even to an AFC Championship in Jacksonville. But, you know, the game changes, and you got to keep up. And sometimes these older coaches, it's harder for them to keep up. And this is probably the correct move. It's not probably. It is the correct move. It just simply had to happen. If you're the Saints, if you're Clint Kubiak, you have to move forward with fresh eyes and a fresh look at an offense that was a little bit stale. Anything else for us today, Andre?
I just think I would say that it's a fun time if you're a Saints fan. You know, you got a lot of new faces coming in, a lot of things that Saints fans have been begging and pleading for, creativity on the offense. It's coming in Clint Kubiak. Protection for the quarterback, you're bringing in a new O-line coach. You know, you're going to have Michael Thomas out of the building, so all the drama that he can bring, you don't have to worry about that anymore. So I think for a Saints fan, it's an exciting time. Things are kind of looking up, and you know, we always say before the season, you hear a lot of Saints fans saying, this is our year, this is the one. They felt very good because of the weak schedule, but I think there's going to be a lot of excitement built up over the course of this offseason. Yeah,
absolutely. And like we said last Friday, the first real pivot into the positive direction this offseason, and it was so needed. We got a big week up ahead. We'll be back on Wednesday with another podcast. I know y'all are out there probably, if you're in New Orleans or wherever they do Mardi Gras, other cities, whatever the case may be, enjoying the parades this week, so be sure to be safe out there. That'll do it for us. For Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. Be sure to catch us next time on Overtime.